I'm just a small town judge, and it's such a small town that I'm sort of the unofficial fleet manager now too, apparently. So we got the Crown Vic, this is the 2010 P7B, back in my shop. Today I'm going to do a brake fluid flush and a tune-up, basically spark plugs and coil packs. Now, this is a unique situation because normally when I do this type of work, the car's just parked here, I just go out and do it. But you never want to do your spark plugs with the engine hot for many reasons. First of which, of course, you don't want to burn yourself, but mainly taking them in and out when it's hot is not a good thing because things expand and contract at different rates and so forth. So this has been sitting here while I gorged on lunch, and I had a fan blowing on it. As you can see, it's cool enough to the touch that I'm leaving my hand on there and it's not getting burned. But I'm not going to do the plugs right away. I'm still going to let it cool even further because it is still warm to the touch. I figure by the time I get the brake fluid flushed, it should be ready for the spark plugs. And if you recall in the last video where I introduced this car, the brake fluid is totally black. This car has been sitting for at least a couple years, so my guess is that brake fluid is at least 3 or 4 years old, probably even older, perhaps even the original fluid. You never know with these sorts of things. And you also saw there were multiple misfires. 5 and 8 were showing, and then it said random misfire as well as misfires on startup. Now, interestingly, I haven't done anything to the car yet, but it drove over here fine. Until it was pretty warmed up, and then it felt like it was probably misfiring a little bit under any kind of load, but just cruising it was fine. So I expect that I'm going to find, bad looking plugs, perhaps a coil pack or two, but I'm going to go ahead and replace all 8 as well, so it'll just be nice and new, ready to go. I'll take off all this piping, look at the air filter, see what sort of trouble we've got there. I may go ahead and clean out the mass air and maybe even the throttle body while I've got this all taken apart. So lots of potential things to do. I would love to detail this engine. You have no idea. This is a WJ Handy Dad nightmare. It needs to be detailed, but I'm not going to have time to do it today. And being an unknown vehicle, not being my vehicle, God only knows if there's any damage that's not really easily visible, and I spray water in it and make something worse. So I'm going to leave that alone. I forgot to mention in the last video, it has no air conditioning, and that's how it came to us with no cap there. So I'm guessing, this is my assumption anyway, that the Schrader valve there leaks, and so they were probably checking it, topping it off or whatever, and then forgot to put the cap on. And of course, you let a car sit for long enough with a leak, it's all going to run out. So I'm going to put the gauges on there. If there's no refrigerant in it, then I will put the vacuum on it and see if it at least holds vacuum, because that will tell me whether or not it's the Schrader valve or something else leaking. So lots of things to do when you get started instead of boring you with conversation, but hopefully at least what I'm talking about is educational and helpful. So I'm going to go sit down and drink an ice cold HEB sugar sweetened cola, and while I do that, I'm going to have my errand boy, the Texas Hamburglar, put this thing up on jack stands, take all 4 wheels off of the car. Hurry up, Hamburglar, and if you do a good job, I'll make it a triple burger today. Oh, that's good stuff. Always sold out, but it's good stuff. It's generally a good idea to try to suck as much of the fluid out of the master cylinder as possible, and it can be as simple as a turkey baster. I've got a little extra hose on the end just to try to reach around the little float there and little piece that they have to try to keep you from being able to do this. And that gives you an idea of the color of the brake fluid. It's a dark brown. And of course it should be almost clear. And always have some paper towels, shop towels, rags, whatever handy, because you don't want to break fluid on anything. And when you've gotten all that you can, then you're ready to do the flush. Step is a pressure test. You pump this up to about 10 psi with it hooked to the master cylinder, and give it a few minutes, and then come back and check and see. So far it's looking good. So as long as it's not losing much, I tend to say maybe 1 psi over 5 minutes is probably an acceptable amount, just because you've got a gasket in here, a gasket in there that could possibly be failing. You also have a hookup there that could be failing a little bit. But if it's dropping significantly, then you've got a problem. And mine seems to be holding. So I'll give it a few more minutes, come back and check it, and then we will put the brake fluid in here, pump this up to 15 to 20, and then go bleed in the order of passenger rear, driver rear, passenger front, driver front. Now what's interesting is that's the accepted bleed order. However, the accepted bleed order, when you do the ABS bleed through the computer, it does driver front, passenger rear, driver rear in that order. So I don't know why the difference, but that's what it calls for. So anyway, come back in a few minutes. We survived the pressure test, and I have filled a quart of brake fluid in here, and now we'll bleed the master cylinder first, if I can get it open. And basically, this is under pressure. It pumps the brake fluid in, which will pump out any air or any old fluid. And so we're just watching it come out of here. And we basically just want to see this start to clear up. That's already pretty clear. The main part of doing this is to make sure there's not air in the master cylinder, which will pump down into your ABS unit probably and create more problems for you. Alright, so there's our bleeder valve on the passenger rear. It's 10 millimeter. I'm going to crack it loose first. Usually they are really tight. I did spray penetrating oil on all of them about 30 minutes ago. They didn't look like they needed it, but I went ahead and did it anyway. And then I'll just open it and let it run, and it will pump the old fluid out and the new in. And there's one issue with the Motive bleeder that I don't like, and that's that it seems to be very finicky about sealing at the master cylinder. And so while I'm sitting here watching this fluid pump, I start hearing this hissing. I went up there and it is spraying the brake fluid from the Motive out of the seal at the master cylinder. So I had to change the gasket on it and come back and let it, I bled it, I held this up, got bubbles out. Anyway, so this one's done. Sorry you didn't get to see that on camera. So what I like to do is pinch that and let it drip in so that it does not drip on my floor, and then come in with the socket wrench and give it a good tightening. And don't forget to put the rubber cap back on. So this one is done. I'll now go to the driver's side rear. This one should go smoothly since it's not leaking pressure. There we go. So you see a little bit of air's coming out. A lot of dark fluids coming out. when the level hits about there, typically the back two have flushed out all the dirty fluid. And that's looking pretty clear. So first I will close this valve, get it kind of a little bit snug like that. And then I like pinch the hose and then let it run down into the bottle. And finally come back with the socket wrench and just give it a good snugging up. Don't forget to recap it. Now the fronts look different, but they're the same principle. Take a 10 millimeter and we're going to just crack it loose. And then open her up and let her flow until we get clear fluid coming out. You can see a little bit of air there. This one shouldn't take too long to flow out. I'll be surprised if we reach the bottom of the label on the, you see I dumped the tube out. And like I said, I'll be surprised if we hit the bottom of the label before it's clear. You never know, but there's a pretty short line to this one, and then obviously the driver's side's really short line. See, it's starting to clear up, and we're just approaching the bottom of the label. I'm letting it run a little bit longer. It's a little bit above the bottom label now. It's looking really good. You see there's no air bubbles in that. That's just fluid. So we'll close her up. Pinch it off. And give it a good crank to tighten it down. And of course, cap it back off, and we'll go. The final one is the driver front. And like I said, that'll be real quick. All right, I've already cracked it a little bit loose and got the tube ready. So here we go. Saw some air come out right off the bat. A lot of dark fluid, and then it starts clearing up pretty rapidly. So it's a pretty short run from the master cylinder to here. I'll let it run until we have clear fluid, and that's already looking very clear. So we'll go ahead and tighten that down. Snug that up, put the cap back on, and the flush is done. The shutdown procedure is to release the air pressure by loosening this top, and you will watch the fluid will rush back in. Now it's not sucking it out of the master cylinder, so don't worry about that. You're not going to have an empty master cylinder. And then remove the cap from the master cylinder. And when you have the proper gasket, it's really tight like this, so don't worry. And then you just want to let that fluid run down back into your tank so it's not dripping all over your floor, all over your car, or anything like that. Gravity is your friend here. If you were overfilled, which there's probably a 50-50 chance that you are, what you can do is squeeze your bottle and put the hose in and let it vacuum out some. Oh, I forget, you got to plug this hole too when you do that. So put your hose in, squeeze the bottle, and then close that, and it will suck it back out of there as much as you need. And it's best to try to duplicate the level that you had. In my case, it was not at the max because the pads are obviously not brand new. I've got it pretty close to the max though, because I generally prefer to have it full rather than empty, because you never know. Like for me, I always take care of things and check on them and so forth, but you never know when you're doing this for somebody else. They may never check it again until the low brake fluid light comes on or something. So this way I know at least they have enough fluid that they'll run their pads out before the fluid. And don't forget to put your bleeder cap back on the master cylinder. So the brakes are done. I'll do the tune-up next.